All right. Chapter 7. Conspiracy, recovery of Dapple, slaying a giant, and home again. Sancho took the high road for Toboso. Remember, he is now on his way back to find Dulcinea to give her the letter that Don Quixote wrote describing how much he loves her while Don Quixote goes crazy in the mountains. The next day, Sancho sighted an inn where they had tossed him in the blanket, and he looked at it fearfully. Oh, and as he looked at it fearfully, he saw two men come out, whom he recognized at once as the priest and the barber from his native village. These two friends of Don Quixote were actually, in fact, searching for the poor gentleman. And when they saw Sancho, they demanded an account of his master, whose horse he was riding. After hesitating, Sancho told them the whole story of their adventures, where his master was, and what he was about. So, as Sancho sets off on this journey, he comes across the same inn where he was tossed in a blanket, right, for not paying for his master's stay there. And he finds these two men, the priest and the barber from their village, from Don Quixote and Sancho Panza's village, who are actually traveling around trying to find Don Quixote. They can't find him anywhere. Okay? So Sancho tells them, oh, well, I'm going to tell you where he is, but you aren't going to like it. And he describes how what his master's plan is, and he's in the woods acting insane while I come and deliver this letter to his loved princess. Okay? That night, they remained at the inn and considered the best means of getting the knight to get back to his house. They came to the conclusion that the most promising plan was to lure him away, or kind of like trick him to come away, by pretending that the Lady Dulcinea had commanded his presence at Toboso. They instructed Sancho carefully in the part he was to play in carrying it out. What was the trick they were going to play on Don Quixote? Layla? They're going to get him to return home because Lady Dulcinea, quote unquote, has demanded that he do so. Ian, you with me? Okay, put your book in your desk. Put your foot down. I know you're with me. I know. It's comfy back there. On the following day, Sancho started off to return to his knight. The priest and the barber would follow at a more leisurely pace. Once he was in the mountains, the squire hunted for his master and found him at last in a rocky recess, with clothes on, thank goodness, and his armor hanging from the branch of a tree. The knight was surprised to see him back so soon, but immediately began asking him questions about his mission to Dulcinea. Now, did he actually go and see Dulcinea? No. So Sancho's going to have to make something up. Now, he's not the smartest, brightest bulb in the box kind of thing. So, Sancho's powers of invention were severely strained, but he had a good deal of natural ingenuity and had been well coached by the priest and barber in what to say. So he may not be the most educated person, but he's pretty good when it comes to on-the-spot kind of stuff. He said at once, truthfully, that in his haste to leave, he had forgotten the letter Don Quixote had written to Dulcinea. So he had accidentally left it there. And indeed, 2 days after he had left, the knight had found the letter still in the pocketbook. Sancho said that because he remembered the message so well, he had not returned for the letter. But the rest of his story had nothing to do with the truth. He told his master, "Oh, yeah, I just repeated the contents of the letter to a parish clerk in a place I came to, and he wrote it down, and then I took it on to Toboso." So, pause. One important thing we learned from this is that Sancho is not educated. He can't read or write. Because Don Quixote had to write the note down, and then Sancho, he had accidentally left it with Don Quixote before he left. Okay? So when he went to leave and was like, "Oh, I forgot the letter." But instead of turning around, he had it memorized. So he went to a clerk and he told him what the letter said so that the clerk could write it down. He couldn't write it himself because he didn't know how to write. You see what I mean? Oh, no doubt you found my queen of beauty in a stately apartment, probably stringing pearls onto gold thread, said Don Quixote. No, sir, replied Sancho. I did find her winnowing bushels of wheat in her father's backyard. What is winnowing? Brooklyn? hmm So he finds her working hard, basically, doing hard labor. She probably didn't look very pretty, nor did she smell very nice. When I offered her the letter, she told me to put it down until her hands were free. So while I waited, I helped her move sacks. Oh, well then, surely you probably perceived a fragrance, a perfume like that of a fancy shop, said Don Quixote. Well, said the squire, I mean, she sure did smell pretty strong, but I thought it was garlic and onions. And she was sweating from the work, so it's kind of hard to know. When she stopped working, she picked up the letter and she ripped it up. For she can't neither read nor write and didn't want her secret to become known by asking anyone to read the letter to her. Is she an educated princess?
No.
No, she can't read or write. So I told her all about your worship's love for her, and she said she would 1,000 times rather see you than read the letter. You are to leave off your pranks among the rocks and briars. And I asked her if a Biscayan fellow had come to her, and she said that one had. But she didn't know anything about Gines de Pasamonte or the galley slaves, who were both supposed to come and profess to Dulcinea how wonderful Don Quixote was. Huh. Well, I suppose she gave you a jewel when you departed? All she gave me was a piece of bread and cheese, he answered. Fine. Well, I go to her at once in obedience to her command, said Don Quixote, which was just what Sancho wanted to hear. There is only one thing I do not understand. It is more than 30 leagues from here to Toboso, but you have only been journeying 3 days to get there and back. He's like, hold on. It's like a much longer distance to get from here to Toboso, and you came back a lot quicker than that. So how did that happen? Oh, well, I mean, I cannot understand it myself, said Sancho, blushing. Why is he blushing? Jacob? Mm-hmm. Because he's lying. I mean, I think there must be magic in it or something. Rocinante just flew like the wind. Oh, yes, that is it, said Don Quixote. It often happens that a friendly magician will enable a knight to get over 1,000 leagues just in one day. While the knight, mounted on Rocinante, went on talking about this subject, and the fat squire unhappily trudged alongside on foot. Pause. Why is Sancho having to walk on foot now? Connor? Uh-huh. They came upon the priest and the barber, who were pretending to be travelers at rest on the roadside. Sancho had been looking for them anxiously, and was glad now to be free from the responsibility of telling more lies. Yes.
Why is the priest red?
Not the priest. Sancho is.
Is he going to?
Oh, you mean coming up?
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll have to see. Don Quixote recognized them at once and got down to greet them. In answer to his inquiries about what brought them there, the priest said, Our friend, Master Nicholas, the barber, and I were going to Seville to get an inheritance of 60,000 crowns left to me by a relative of mine in India. But yesterday we were attacked by 4 highwaymen who stripped us of everything worth taking. These thieves were said to be part of a gang of galley slaves that were set free in this region by a man valiant enough to overcome their guards and mad enough to let loose such a pack of wolves. Who had attacked the priest and the barber? Micah? The chain gang that Don Quixote had let go. Now, is that true? No.
Maybe.
But they're trying to make Don Quixote feel like, ooh, yeah, that was my fault. Sorry, guys. Don Quixote hung down his head at these words, but Sancho cried out, "In truth, your reverence, it was my master who did that wonderful job." Like, thanks, Sancho, appreciate that. "Well, and if I did," said Don Quixote angrily, "it is because it is a knight's duty to help the distressed and suffering, and I am prepared to make good this principle against anyone with my spear and sword." No one present would accept the challenge, and so they walked on in silence until a very curious incident occurred. Sancho was plodding along wearily, full of regret over his lost apple, when they saw a man on a gray donkey coming towards them. A single glance convinced Sancho that this man was riding the donkey he had just been thinking about, and a second look equally satisfied him that the rider was none other than that bandit Gines de Pasamonte, disguised as a gypsy. The thief was just as quick to perceive the danger he had unexpectedly fallen into, and he jumped down and ran off at a speed that made pursuit hopeless. Sancho ran to Dapple, and with many endearing words, kissed her and hugged her neck as if she had been a lost child. Mounted on her once again, Sancho felt a new joy in life and thought no more of his recent troubles and discomforts. So as they're walking along, they run into Gines de Pasamonte riding on Sancho's donkey. He's like, "What? Hold on. That's my donkey!" And immediately Gines de Pasamonte is like, oh boy, I'm in trouble. He jumps off the donkey and runs off as fast as he can. Now, good news is Sancho's got his donkey back. He doesn't have to walk anymore. Bad news is Pasamonte is gone again. Okay? Ian.
When Gines took the horse, he said he could sell it. So
Apparently he wasn't able to sell it.
no, it doesn't say that it was Gines. It just says in the second horse, equally satisfied that the rider was none other than Gines de Pasamonte. So it could have been just a gypsy.
Could have been, but the book makes us leads us to believe that it's Pasamonte. And later in the
And also
Okay.
says the thief.
later in the book, I believe it does say again that it was him. And then later it does say the thief, which would be Pasamonte. Layla, that's a good point. Oh, what? A gypsy? Someone who kind of like doesn't ever stay in one place. They kind of pick up and travel. They might like stay in a tent overnight or something like that. Late in the afternoon of the next day, the party reached the inn where the blanket tossing incident had occurred. Little was said of that topic after the innkeeper was assured that all charges would be paid this time. Don Quixote retired early, being overly fatigued, and soon fell into a feverish sleep. But the rest of the party, as well as the other guests, stayed up very late, talking and telling stories. They were nearly finished when Sancho burst in among them and cried out with great dismay, Come quickly to my master! He's in a desperate battle with an enormous giant, whose head he has sheared off his shoulders as clean as a turnip, and there's blood running everywhere." They could now hear Don Quixote shouting, "Stand to it, scoundrel! You cannot escape me, and your scimitar will not save you!" Then came the sound of blows against the walls. "Bless me," said the innkeeper. "I hope your master has not interfered with the wine bags hanging near his head." And with that, the whole company made for the knight's room. Okay. Real quickly, I want you to turn to this next page. Okay? This is the picture. Now, these are the wine bags. Okay? Now, the whoever drew them to look like faces intentionally. Okay? But whatever the case, here's Don Quixote sleep fighting or sleepwalking or something, slashing around his sword, and he's cut open the wine bags. Okay? Now turn back and we're going to read. The first thing they saw was Don Quixote standing in his shirt, with a little red nightcap on his head and a blanket over his left arm, slashing with his sword all around him. The landlord's fears proved true. The room was flooded with wine from the gashed wine bags. The landlord lunged for Don Quixote, who seemed to be sleepwalking, but the others kept him from harming the knight. The barber threw a bucket of water on Don Quixote to awaken him, but it hardly seemed to bring him to his senses. Sancho declared that he had seen the giant and went looking for its head. Not finding it, he said this inn was enchanted. So now we have Sancho believing it too. "Why, you enemy of God and all the saints," said the landlord, "can't you see this is nothing but wine from those ripped up skins? Neither you nor your crazy master will escape this time without paying every penny of the damages." The priest calmed the innkeeper and his family down, promising that all the wines and skins would be paid for. Don Quixote, who was still in a state of fever, was put back to bed under Sancho's care, and then peace ruled the inn again. Layla?
Over at the church, Don Quixote thinks about her giant head and blood. Is it in blue pen?
Oh, yes, it's because it's an old book and someone must have written in it many years ago. It was several days before the knight was well enough to resume the homeward journey again, which he now made stretched out in an ox cart hired for that purpose. It was noon on Sunday when the party reached the village, and everybody, especially the niece and housekeeper, was shocked to see how pale and thin and weak the knight was. So, did Sancho and the priest and barber succeed in getting him back to the inn?
No.
Or getting him back to his house?
No.
Yes, they did. It was several days before the knight was well enough to resume the homeward journey again, which he now made stretched out in an ox cart hired for that purpose. It was noon on Sunday when the party finally reached the village, and everybody, especially his niece and housekeeper, was shocked to see how pale and thin and weak the knight was. So they did convince him to go back. Now, he was technically kind of in like a feverish state, so he wasn't thinking very clearly, so they didn't really convince him to go back, but they were able to get him back home because he was pretty sick. Yes. I mean, yeah, he was certainly not taking care of himself. Mm-hmm. The balsam. While he was being carried into the house to be put to bed, Sancho's wife, Teresa, came out to greet him. First, she asked about Dapple's health, and satisfied herself by looking over the donkey. Then she turned to her husband and asked him what profit he had to show for deserting his family. She was like, "Well, what money did you bring home? You deserted us, so at least you better have brought something home. Ian, you with me?" Her ruffled temper was smoothed, however, when she learned that he had come home with 100 gold crowns, plus the wages he earned from the trip. As for the glory he claimed from it, she thought as little of that as she did of the prospect of being the governor of an island. What's the only thing his wife cared about? Micah? The money. She's not very nice. Many days later, when Don Quixote's health was improved, and he and Sancho had been talking together, Sancho came home in such a cheery mood that his wife asked, "What makes you so pleased?" "Oh, wife of mine," he answered, "I am so well pleased that I would be more pleased, if it pleased God, that I was less pleased than I am pleased." "Ugh, I do not understand you, husband. How can one be pleased not to be pleased?" "This way, Teresa. I am planned to return to the service of Don Quixote, my master, who desires to go on adventures for a third time. I wish to come across another 100 crowns, if possible. I am sorry to part from you and the children, for if I could live at home at ease, it would be better than tramping around on rough roads. And that is why I say I would be better pleased, if God pleased I was not so pleased, to go." Oh, just look here, Sancho, said Teresa. Ever since you went around knight-erranting, you talk in such a roundabout way that no one can understand you. It is enough that God understands me. Now, take special care of Dapple, and see that she is in good condition, and the pack saddle is in good order, for we shall have to endure many hardships, many giants and dragons and evil spirits, and hissings and roarings and bellowings and bleatings, not to mention enchanted Moors, who are worse than all the rest together. My only hope from all this is for an island where I can live without trouble or danger. Why can't you do without an island? Said Teresa. I don't understand you. Do what you please and don't bother me with your speeches. But if you are determined to be a governor, why not take your son Sancho with you and bring him up into the business? I will send for him, with plenty of money for his expenses. And as for our daughter Mary, Sancho, she shall be a countess. Send money for the boy, but as for Mary, I shall think of her as being good as dead the day she becomes a countess. But do whatever you please, for wives must obey their husbands, even when they're blockheads. Is Sancho's wife very supportive of his knight-errantry?
Yes.
No.
She does not think it's a good idea. And on that parting shot, Sancho returned to his master, who was just then talking earnestly with a man named Samson Carrasco, a young friend and neighbor of Don Quixote, who had recently finished his studies at the University of Salamanca. The young man was telling Don Quixote that his fame had spread far and wide, and in turn, listening to his views on knight-errantry, all with the idea of weaning Don Quixote from his delusions, or at least keeping him safe at home. So Samson Carrasco is this college student who has come to Don Quixote's house to try and help him psychologically, like try to help him see things as they really are and get him away from this crazy fantasy of knight-errantry. He could think of no better treatment than one based on the very folly of the knight. And so, far from opposing the plan for a new expedition, he was encouraging it. So for some reason, this guy is encouraging him to go on the next trip. His advice was a surprise to the knight, and more so to the niece and housekeeper, who had supposed Carrasco would do his best to oppose the madness of their master. 3 days later, however, Don Quixote and Sancho sallied forth again, the knight with a new helmet supplied by Carrasco, who insisted on escorting them well beyond the village. So, here they go again on a third trip.
I know. Yes, I know. It's not
Maybe. Oh, there we go.